Welcome to CTV 29. My name is Vincent Faney. I'm the producer of the new show, Vinsanity Unplugged, in search of game changers. My job, my passion is to go out into the community and examine various people in different aspects of life, various walks of life, whether they're a musician, artist, scientist, people who are changing the game within their discipline. And today, we're looking at a candidate who is reputed to be changing the game herself. She's running for state representative here in Oregon. And what district will that be?
It would be State Senate District 6.
Okay, this is Christine Ruck.
Hi.
Hi.
Glad to be here today.
Glad to have you here. So, the biggest thing is people want to know where you're from, where you've been, your education, and so forth. And
well, I've been in Oregon since 1993.
Okay.
I came here with a job transfer with a telecommunications company that was based in Corvallis.
Uh-huh.
So I live in the Lebanon area, and prior to that, I had lived in Arizona, Michigan, Ohio, a couple of states. Moved around a lot as a kid. My dad was a regional service manager for a farm equipment manufacturer, International Harvester.
Okay.
And we had come here as immigrants in 1963.
Immigrants.
Immigrants.
Okay.
So
cool.
that's how I got here.
All right.
Followed mom and dad in the back of the old Ford and went all the way to Arizona on the first trip.
Well, checking out some of your stats, I mean, you got some major skills, science skills, technological institute or a university, and industrial engineering and quality assurance. That's a lot of heavy-duty stuff.
I went to college at Michigan Tech, and the program at the time, of course, they always change names of different programs. It was electromechanical engineering technology. Wow. Which was more the hands-on and applied things rather than the theoretical side.
Right.
So I was always better on the applied side anyway.
Okay.
As far as industrial engineering and quality engineering, those were titles I ended up with employers. Uh-huh. And those were not degree programs for me. One of the reasons I was valuable that one of my first jobs was because I did not have an engineering degree. We were caught in a patent infringement suit about 4 months after I started with the company. Okay. And I became an important piece of the puzzle because we had to make sure that if an average person, which I fit that definition, could take the published literature out of any library in the country and figure out how to produce the results in the patent, that patent would be invalid. So that helped keep the company's doors open. So I spent 3 years being that average person. And I had a lot of help along the way because I was legally allowed to ask questions of any of the expert witnesses that we had employed as a company. Okay. If I could ask the question, they could answer it. They couldn't teach me, they couldn't suggest reading materials, but what I developed was a sense of how to ask the right questions to get the information needed to solve a problem. Okay, so you got major critical thinking skills. And I backed into it in a very unusual way. So I don't think there's an engineering program in the country that is structured in exactly that way, but I had some excellent mentors along the way. It's interesting. I know quite a few people in various industries who kind of were self-taught, and they've been in the trenches, and they didn't get the formal education. Then later on, they got the formal education, and they somehow their time in the trenches and learning how to think outside the box put them ahead of their peers once they had it all worked together, and that sounds like where you're at. To a certain extent, some of that I got at home. My dad had taught as well. Part of his job was to teach at different parts of the country. You know, if a new engine or transmission came out, he would take it apart, teach the mechanics how to do it. And at the time, there were an awful lot of slideshows. That was the way you did it before PowerPoint. And if he didn't like the package that came out, he would take it apart, put it back together, and my brother and I became the guinea pigs. So here we are in junior high taking these courses from my father, and as long as we could pass the quiz, that's the package he taught to the adults. So by the time I went to college, I knew a lot more about hydraulic pumps and injection systems than a lot of guys in their early 20s who were employed to do that. So my brother continued down that track, and I went in another direction. Yeah, sadly, I'm one of those unfortunate guys who I can put the gas in my car and change the oil, and that's it. So that's a good start. Yeah, it's a good start. So you got a massive education, and you got a lot of in the trenches and training on various areas. So tell us, it looks like you've done a lot of things in government too prior to what you're doing now. It's kind of an odd start in government. My husband and I were rehabilitating a building, and we were being extorted by a building inspector. and he thought he was going to be able to get away with it. Most people just handed him a check because they wanted to move forward, and we said, I don't think that's going to happen here. So I headed down to City Hall, figured out who his boss was, and went in and had a chat with his boss. And a couple weeks later in the newspaper, there's an executive session of the city council, and all of a sudden a couple other building inspectors were gone as well. So, you know, when you go to get a permit and somebody says, well, you need a plumbing system, and I'm basically working on a storage facility that has no bathroom, I'm not going to pay you for a plumbing system.
Right.
That's not going to happen.
Right.
So I think the mayor realized that maybe I was going to make sure things went right, and he decided to go ahead and appoint me to a master transportation planning committee. And at the time, there were several elements: the bicycle paths,
right.
You know, roadways, the state highways, and my husband and I had a background in aviation as well. We're both pilots, so I became the person who was able to then chime in on different aspects of the airport, what kind of airspace it was, the value to the economy locally. Those just weren't things that people knew on that committee. So I started there, and I eventually started working with Department of Aviation issues, taxation on fuels, planning of airports, surrounding land use, that sort of thing. Stayed with that several years, and I met quite a few people who ended up in the legislature 20 years ago. They eventually moved on, and that's what they did as well.
Okay.
Not necessarily the same side of the aisle as me, but that's okay. We learned a lot from each other in that process. I also had a lot of travel with my job, and so being in the quality arena, we had several facilities here in the United States, several in Europe, and so whenever there was a problem, I would end up going to that facility and doing an audit, essentially. I would go in, find out what was supposed to be happening, find out what was really going on, and then come up with the recommendations to fix it. So that made it very, very difficult to continue on in an elected office of any capacity, and I wasn't going to sign up for anything I couldn't complete.
Right.
You know, the one thing that drives me crazy is somebody volunteers for a job and then just doesn't show up.
Yeah.
That really isn't a service to your community, and you lose a lot of friends real quick.
It's my pet peeve as well. Yeah.
Right. So after that company, well, the facility in Corvallis was closed and moved to Shanghai. And once that happened, I was asked if I wanted to go to China for a while. And I said, that's okay. My Chinese is not very good, and it's not a very healthy environment to live in. And I had actually taken the job transfer to actually live in Oregon, not just leave my husband behind with the animals. That was not the purpose of it.
How long did you have to spend over there?
I didn't. I did not go.
You did not go,
no,
okay.
If they decided they wanted to move those jobs overseas, they were welcome to figure it out.
Okay.
If they thought what we did was so darn easy, they made a mistake.
Yeah.
They should have reconsidered that, because we had some of the best quality products and the lowest warranty costs of any of the facilities in the U.S. or Europe. So we made it look too easy in a sense.
Yeah.
And so they figured to just box it up and ship it over there and dump it out and have everything go back together. But they didn't realize how long it took to get everybody to work together, and how to do things like design reviews, where you looked at what you were trying to achieve, and people from different departments had a chance to make recommendations on how to fix those things and make sure that it didn't break. So if we made 20,000 units of something, the only one I wanted coming back for warranty repair of any kind was not a warranty repair. It was something that got struck by lightning on a tower. We didn't make things that failed.
Yeah,
that was the goal.
I've talked to quite a few people who are entrepreneurs, and these are people with major skills. They got PhDs in it, more or less in the industrial arts. They get hands-on people creating inventions. They have their companies here, and then they decide to like ship it out overseas so they could increase their profit margin. And they're specifically disappointed with the results in China because they just dropped the ball. Just like you said, they just couldn't get people to work together properly, and and then over time, some of the companies kind of stole and repackaged and basically stole the product. And it's one thing.
It's the second shift movement, which would be you have the official factory, but there's another duplicate factory that runs in parallel.
Right.
And it became very difficult because some companies had a hard time auditing and tracking exactly how many parts were really produced.
Right.
And sometimes the duplicate suppliers were not of the same quality as the ones who were qualified.
Right.
Sometimes the inventories became mixed, and they finally detected it once things started failing because they came from the wrong supplier.
And it's like, just try to sue those people. Those are telling somebody in another, so
the liability
it's
is not the
it's
same.
it's just
not the
horrible.
No.
So anyways, what got you interested in running for office, and what is on your radar right now that you're looking towards to
why
get
do I
people
run
excited?
for office? Well, every time I got involved in an issue, I was finding out that the people involved in making the decisions often knew less about it than I did.
Wow.
And if they weren't knowledgeable about what it was they were trying to make a decision on, those decisions weren't always good decisions.
Right.
The unintended consequences cost us a lot.
Right. Yeah.
And that happens over and over in government. I looked at things at the county level, and got on the county budget committee, and I've understood where we've spent the money, how we've saved money. Some of those things are going very well, but I also discovered that a lot of things that caused problems were promulgated out of the legislature.
Okay.
And so basically your legislative seats, you have a House seat and a Senate seat.
Right.
You can run for one or the other. So there's another gentleman that's running for the House district seat that's half of the Senate district, and that's Mark Herbert. And he and I have worked together on a couple of ideas that hopefully we can bring forward.
Cool.
We found we've got a real synergy in the way we work.
Yeah.
And so that's encouraging, hoping both of us get elected. But I kept finding that I was ready to serve in these capacities. I did a lot of testifying on bills going back to when we did redistricting the last time. And so I've seen what gerrymandering looks like in action while it's happening.
Okay. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a very bad thing.
Okay, because I'm going to be asking you questions because you're my Obi-Wan Kenobi in this.
Okay, well, that's fine.
Okay.
The Oregon statutes say that districts should be as contiguous as possible. So you want to basically keep it compact. You want to have communities of common interest.
Okay.
Okay, so this particular district runs from outside the city limits of Lebanon and Sweet Home, sweeps through a lot of rural areas, picks up Harrisburg, then comes down to Eugene and Springfield, and then goes on down to Creswell.
Okay.
That's fine. We're all contained within this border on a map. But there are quite a bit of differences between the rural areas where the primary function is agriculture.
Right.
And then you have U of O and Springfield, which you have a university thing, academic. There are other things. It's not as contiguous as it might be. And contiguous, one of the ways you can score that is how many miles is it when you calculate the border.
Okay.
It's a very simple way to do it.
Okay.
You can also use things like zip codes.
Okay.
The post office has already figured out all these nifty little numbered districts and how far they want to drive the trucks from the post office. So if you're trying to balance it out, you could already take existing boundaries, put that together to meet the population average. If you have a number of districts, you just take the population of the state, divide it by the number of districts, and that's approximately how many people you want in each one.
Okay.
So a Senate district contains 2 House districts, is the way it works. So you end up, in any address, you always have a senator, you always have a House rep.
Okay.
But the senators basically cover both of those House districts. So it's like a 3-person team, essentially.
Good. All right. So
that's how it works.
So you're hoping that your 2 other teammates you'll all be working in unison, hopefully, right?
Unison isn't necessary.
Isn't necessary.
No, it's not necessary. Quite honestly, some of the reasons why design reviews work in a manufacturing and private industry setting is not everybody comes at something from the exact same perspective.
I guess.
If you all know how to use a screwdriver and you've never seen a hammer, you're going to be surprised when you have to come across and do something with a nail.
Well, I meant, I guess.
So, everybody's got a different toolbox, a set of skills, and so if everybody has the same background, you don't get as rich of a result.
Okay. No,
and you really don't. So, the Oregon legislature should theoretically be able to function pretty well. You've got a lot of urban, you've got a lot of rural people, different industries, different backgrounds. You would think that things would work better than they do.
Yeah.
They don't.
No?
No, you're dealing with people. And as soon as you throw in people, things kind of go off in different ways.
So what this gerrymandering, why is it done? Who decides it gets done? And why are the results usually less than satisfactory?
They're not always unsatisfactory.
Okay.
But if there's a single party in power, that tends to be where you have districts drawn with unusual shapes that help them maintain a majority advantage by voter registration.
Okay.
That's what gerrymandering does.
Okay.
It happens at the hand of various parties. Lots of different states have similar problems. Oregon has quite a few districts that I think probably meet the definition and the objective of keeping them contiguous. And others look a little bit like a noodle.
Okay.
So
it sounds... Okay, so what are you hoping to accomplish when you finally get into office? What are the things that really drive you? What are you most passionate about these days?
Okay. Well, everybody goes, well, you need 3 things. I said, well, you know, I've got more fingers than that.
Okay.
Healthcare is an issue. Housing is an issue. The economy, environmental regulation needs to be effective and reasonable, and not price us out of jobs and the ability to keep things under control. People need to have access to affordable things, life's necessities. They're way too expensive in Oregon. We've over-regulated a lot of things, driven up the cost compared to other states. And we haven't always run things efficiently. Everybody sees a lot of headlines where a particular department has millions of dollars in lawsuits or overpayments to an agency. Those kind of things aren't getting fixed the way they should. And therefore, when they're not fixed, there's a couple of ways you can fix it. Either increase the taxes to cover up the problem, or go back and fix the problem so it doesn't cost us so much.
Okay.
I'm more on the fix it up so it doesn't cost us so much camp.
Okay.
Only because if it's done right the first time, it's going to be cheaper. Good. And I think that's true in just about everything.
Everything, yeah.
Right. So a little bit of common sense should go a long way.
Yes.
And that's what I hope to apply. And with my auditing skills and being able to break down a problem into pieces that can be addressed, that I think is going to be maybe one of the biggest assets I bring.
So you like
the legislature as a whole.
I was talking to Mark Herbert, and it was evident he's kind of a systems thinker, and and that's kind of what you are, right? You break it down just to see how the system interrelates, and just kind of
and I do more in the sense of process mapping, making sure you get consistent results. Mark's really good on the number side of things. He's going to be able to help understand the cost of what we're doing and the various options, because sometimes you do have more than one solution possible. You have to make sure that you get to the final result that you want.
Okay.
How do you put all those pieces together? And for me, one of the things you have to do first is make sure that things are consistent. If something is consistent, then you're able to change the direction of the result.
Right.
To get more or less of something. But if a process is broken, say you have an agency that has 100 employees, if they're all doing things a different way, you're not going to get very consistent results.
Right.
But if you have a process where everybody's doing things the same way, you're going to get to the same point. Now, if that's the wrong point, you need to make adjustments to get it to where it should be. So that's essentially how a lot of problem solving works. And when you're in the business world and dealing with paperwork and information systems, it can get complicated really quick.
Well, you know, you just mentioned, just before I forget, about bringing down the cost of life necessities for the citizen. Aside from healthcare, what were you thinking? Were you thinking of like material goods? Were you thinking of like services, or what were you?
All of the above.
All the above.
All of the above. Oregon did something pretty bizarre when it came to saying we need to have a more sustainable energy portfolio.
Okay.
They changed the definition of hydroelectric power to say that it was not renewable. That seems pretty bizarre, because we all know that rain continues to come down, lakes continue to go up, and the water goes down the turbine, and we're still producing a little bit of juice that comes through the wires from Bonneville, and we all use it. That's still renewable. But yet, the definition was changed so that the taxes that we're all paying, in addition to what we traditionally paid on our electric power, is higher. And that is being used, theoretically, to be applied to new energy projects.
Is that the reason why my electric bill has been going up?
I'm sure there's a piece of it that's in there. It's sometimes difficult to see exactly which nickel came from what change in the law.
Okay.
Once it's in the wire, you don't see it, and different agencies are going to maybe account for things a little bit differently. A cooperative is going to be a little different structure than some of the others that are just asking the PUC, just give me my cost back. And that does go directly to the ratepayers.
Okay.
In some cases, if we do things right and more efficiently, some of those costs should be able to go down.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how many people have seen a decrease in their bills lately. I just don't hear very much of that.
I haven't seen it.
So.
No. I have not seen it.
But we're all going to raise our hands when it happens.
Yes, okay.
Look at this. You're not going to believe it.
So what else you got on the agenda that you'd like to talk about?
Today, one of the things I really like to work on, and this is not necessarily having to do with legislation immediately, but I've been involved in looking after foster kids that have been abused for a long time. It started out many years ago. I was helping through the local PTA, assisting some of the students who had lost family members. They were kind of lost as students. They needed somebody who could kind of tutor them in a particular subject, but also just be a set of ears that they needed somebody to talk to.
Okay.
They had been placed in foster care with a family that was not maybe as supportive as you would have hoped for a child who'd been orphaned.
Okay.
It just happened to be a neighborhood kid. And
so the foster parents were
not as engaged as you would hope. I mean, they were providing food, clothing, and shelter, but this child didn't seem to have the emotional support or somebody who could just listen.
Right.
The foster parents were busy earning a living and taking care of their own kids, and he didn't feel as included as he should have. So, that was one of the kids that I came across. But I had a chance to work with a lot of the counselors in that elementary school. And so when it came time to deal with the school budgets, she asked me to go in and testify on behalf of the kids who didn't have parents who were as engaged. Because, of course, all the kids who have parents who are sports parents and providing help with the music programs and theater, those are generally fairly engaged parents, and they're there to advocate for that group.
Right.
But there wasn't a set of parents walking in that said, we need to make sure the needs of my child are taken care of.
Right.
Those parents were not there. And it wasn't always that they were inadequate parents. Some of them just had really tough things going on. Some of them had divorces. Some of them had a death in the family that was unexpected. Those kids tended not to do as well. They needed those counseling services. But I don't know too many parents that want to go in and say, you know what, my kid's having a tough time right now because life at home is not, it's not June and Ward Cleaver. Things aren't going great.
Right.
Nobody wants to go in front of a crowd and say that kind of thing.
Yeah, it makes
So she asked me to do it on behalf of the other kids, and I was happy to do that. So I started advocating for them there, and I also got an appointment to a Citizens Review Board.
Right.
And what that is, within the foster care system, if a child has been in care for more than 6 months, that case should be reviewed at least every 6 to 12 months. And the people reviewing the case are volunteers who have criminal background checks, training through the Department of Justice, and so on, teaching us how to conduct the hearings and interview the children, the foster parents, the attorneys for the children, the attorneys for the parents, any people that show up from, say, county social services of some sort, maybe the mental health professionals, and make sure that we understand the scope of what the child is receiving, how they're doing, are there services missing, what kind of things does the judge need to maybe make part of a new court order the next time that case comes before them. So we would distill down a lot of paperwork from, say, 500 to 1,000 pages down to 3, maybe 4 pages. And we got to see a lot of the most difficult cases. The kids who were in foster care for a short time where parents were able to take care of things, kids go back home. We didn't see those cases. We saw the kids who were not having that kind of a result. And those ones do break your heart. You lose a lot of sleep. There are tears, that are shed in those hearing rooms, and it's not just the parents, it's not just the kids, the people who have to see these things. There's a certain amount of trauma that goes with it. And I was warned ahead of time by a district attorney that it was going to be rougher than I might thought.
So what is the most common form of child abuse out there? I mean, people hear abuse, all sorts of things, horrific things come to mind.
A lot of things are included. There's a system called ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. And that pretty much covers a whole range of things. Does the child have adequate access to a stable food supply? Do they feel like they're included and valued in their family? Are they witnessing domestic violence of some sort? Do they have a parent who's incarcerated? There are 10 different criteria, and these scores are being studied now to determine just what are the long-term effects on their life. There are a lot of health effects, and it shouldn't be a complete surprise, but now they're being quantified in a different way. If a child has 4 or more of these 10 criteria, they have basically a 200% greater chance of having a heart attack later in life.
Wow.
If you look at suicide statistics, those same kids with a score greater than 4 have a 1,200% chance greater of committing suicide.
Oh, my God.
Okay. So when somebody thinks back, ages ago, somebody would say, well, somebody had a rough childhood.
Yeah, that's over.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
So now there's a way to quantify it in these different categories, basically tell me various things that we need to work on. A lot of this comes from situations that might happen to a family. Somebody loses his job, loses their home. Well, then you've got a child who may not feel like they've got enough food. Can you wear clean clothes to school today? Do you know where you're going to be tomorrow? Are mom and dad maybe arguing about things? The kids experience a lot of additional things that if home life were stable and things were affordable, maybe they wouldn't be experiencing that same.
A lot of kids also take on the burden of guilt, like a mom and dad would not be in a situation if it wasn't for me, and now they're suffering because of me. And
I ran into a child who was sitting there, playing with their face, and I said, "Sweetie, what's wrong?" And she said, "My tooth hurts." And I said, "Did you tell mom and dad?" And she said, "I can't go to the dentist because it's too expensive and we don't have any money right now."
Yeah.
So when you hear something like that, these
it's
kids are all 100% adorable, and every single one of them deserves better. No child deserves to be in pain. No kid needs any kind of neglect or abuse, or to have to witness that in a lifetime. It's not good experiences for them.
It's something I have trouble bearing. To watch. I did a stint that I really enjoyed, working with kids at risk. These are kids that had various substance abuse addictions, and so it was like a rehab place where they're getting dried out or detoxed, and they had like 3 hits against them, mental issues, emotional problems.
These things accumulate, and that's where this ACEs score starts saying, you get 1 point for each yes on this quiz.
And so you see
it's
these...
pretty serious, and it adds up quickly.
Oh, and the things, when you read the dossier and you say, okay, why is this kid here? Because, we're told to read what their history, so we have an understanding of, like...
how to help them.
Right. And so you find out the horrific things that some of their, the way they were treated by their various relatives, immediate and otherwise, and you're like, oh my God, these are the people that are entrusted to protect them and so forth. And, and so,
and those protective behaviors just aren't there in some adults. Some of them have had their childhood experiences that they didn't get a chance to see how to be a parent that was going to be able to do those things successfully.
Right.
You learn what you've experienced in some cases. Some of them know this isn't right, but they weren't shown a better way to do things.
Right, right,
and some are a little bit...
Well, you're not given a manual. It's just your parents raised a certain way. It's just kind of, people kind of wing it.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
If they're lucky, they've got, some family support structure with them, but, families move more now than they did 50, 100 years ago. So a lot of the extended family connections and those teaching mechanisms just aren't there for every child anymore. So
are you working with a coalition or a network of agencies and people who are helping you to resolve a lot of these problems with this abuse?
Well, within the official foster care system, which is where I saw one of the most valuable groups was the CASA volunteers. The court-appointed special advocates.
Okay.
And most communities, most counties have groups that do that.
Okay.
And these people are court-appointed, essentially, and they will work with a single child or a group of children within the same family, and they become their advocate in court. Because if you've got a child who's in foster care, they might not be able to explain how things are impacting them. But when you've got a trained volunteer who is there specifically to be the advocate for that particular child, they become that child's voice.
Okay.
So, and they'll stay with that same child perhaps for years. They become maybe the most consistent person in that child's life. If they're transferred from one foster care or foster family to another, that CASA volunteer does not change.
Okay, it becomes like a permanent relative almost, right?
Well, it's,
a godfather.
Godfather, the nice lady next door, whatever the case may be. But there are men and women that do that. It's just something that they want to do. Each county has a group that provides training. They are always in search of volunteers. If you look at the number of cases in each county for foster care, they always have a shortage of people assigned to CASA.
How many, if you had to throw out a number, how many cases per county would you say? Like, what is it? What a number? Like just.
There are lots of numbers. If you go to, say, give me foster care statistics in Oregon, you will be taken to DHS websites, and there are charts that tell you how many kids in each county are experiencing, who's new in the system, who's coming back.
And is there such a shortage of resources that there's a waiting list that some people can't get in?
For CASA volunteers?
No, for the kids to be taken care of, like kids that are having a certain amount of safe and security.
Intake, the caseworkers are vastly over-allocated. I mean, they have way more cases per caseworker than you can handle.
Wow. And
it's very difficult. If they have to do an intake interview, there may be hours of things going on, sometimes involving law enforcement. Are there medical issues that have to be addressed right away? You just don't know until it happens. Sometimes it's multiple kids.
That would just be
it's a lot of
It's a heartbreak.
It is a heartbreak. Law enforcement becomes a piece of that quite often. They're called in. A lot of times, these situations are recognized by the mandatory reporters in schools.
Now you said something
about...
So
a teacher, a counselor, maybe the one who says, we've got a child here that needs to be assessed.
So is there like a variety of ways to attack this problem, to deal with the...
Ways to detect
to address
to detect the case, and then ways to work through it. There are lots. So there are the official channels, of course, that the foster care system, they're tracking it officially, because at that point a child has been taken out of the home and placed with an alternative home of some sort. But within a community, there are always groups. Lebanon has one, Dela's Blue Angels. Dela is a community policing officer with the Lebanon Police Department, and she's got a real passion for working with kids, and so she has a network of friends that's quite wide. And so just 2 weeks ago, there was a walk, a 5K walk that was to raise child abuse awareness. So it began at the Justice Center in Lebanon. So here are all these additional pinwheels and ribbons and things that are in blue, and that's the color for child abuse prevention. That's the color that cause has taken on. So April is National Child Abuse Prevention Month.
April, so national.
April is nationally.
Wow.
So this is, we're trying to increase awareness as to what's there.
Right.
DHS does have on their various websites the things that somebody might be able to do. They would explain maybe to a neighbor that sees something that's not right. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can expect. Here's who you would talk to. Not everybody is comfortable reporting things, because sometimes they're calling in a problem that's occurring in a family member's home. So there are a lot of family dynamics that come into play there. Who's not going to be welcome in future family events. And that's a difficult thing, because there's a point where you have to put the child's need ahead of some of these other relationships. And quite often, the abuse is taking place in a family setting. Somebody's not able to give the children what they need, and another family member ends up reporting. So that really is one of the most difficult aspects of dealing with this, and that's why sometimes the foster system really has to take hold, because certain things get covered up. In particular, the cases where there's sexual abuse involved. The silence is deafening. And the children are groomed and taught, just don't say anything to anybody and then they are threatened behind the scenes mentally. If you do tell somebody, this is what's going to happen. And the threats they're presented with are things like, if you tell somebody, they're going to take away mom and dad.
Right.
Or you're going to have to go live with strangers.
Or you'll be homeless.
Or mom and dad
whatever.
are going to get mad if they find out what we've been doing. They're going to do something to me, and then they're going to go to prison for it. Mm-hmm. It scares a child. They don't know how to cope with those kind of things. The trauma that presents them is just, they don't feel like they have any control anymore. They will comply. And so that's a tough thing to see overall. A couple
friends of mine are therapists, and I was asking them, I said, well, what is the incident of sexual abuse and so forth? And he said it's like, years ago, he said it's going up. He said like 1 in 4. Yeah. 1 in 4 people.
Right.
You know, when they're kids.
Boys and girls.
Boys and girls. And you're like,
and
oh my God,
good.
1 in 4? How do, you know, it's inconceivable. But
right. It is, but it happens a lot.
Yeah.
One of the things with the CRB that I found very valuable long term, every year we would have recurrent training, like continuing education credits for certain professions. So it would typically be a 2-day conference, and there'd be a lot of different breakout sessions to deal with different reporting, dealing with different cultural issues and so on. But one of the most impactful presentations I saw was on the law enforcement perspective and what they learned from people who were incarcerated for child abuse, how they went about finding and grooming their victims for abuse. And it was probably one of the more disgusting things I spent an afternoon listening to.
Were they basically fessing up and saying, this is how I did it, that kind of thing?
They did. So there were interviews.
So there's no embarrassment that they're even not reticent to...
This was done, it was kind of a national thing, so the films we were seeing were people who were interviewing people in prison, not necessarily Oregon, but the techniques they were using were quite similar. And it's really scary to see what's going on. They would oftentimes find a parent who was struggling in some way, often financially. So quite a few times they would look for somebody, maybe a single mom, who was maybe having a hard time making ends meet, didn't always have the same amount of time available to supervise the children personally, may have needed a ride somewhere, may have needed babysitting services and so on. So they kind of befriended that, and that, oh, well, you know, let me take the kids out for ice cream and so on. And they started by gaining the confidence of the parent first. They wouldn't touch the kids for quite a while. They needed to be darn sure that the parent wasn't going to object to these things, that they were going to be, in the parent's eyes, somebody who was helpful to the family.
What a great person, yeah.
So they would spend sometimes months doing that, and then they would eventually start, you know, teasing the kids, wrestling, doing different things, and touching things, and they would test to see if that adult would react. Did that parent say, hey, knock it off, kids, come over here, and you need to leave? Now, if that happened, that child was safe. But all too often it was like, oops, hey, well, you guys are getting a little too rambunctious. But somebody was testing the envelope to see where they could go. And eventually they would do things, a lot of times taking pictures was a big thing with them. They would eventually start taking pictures of the kids and see just what they could get the kids to do. Taking the pictures, and then they would show the child a picture and say, you know what, I'm not sure mom and dad would appreciate seeing what you've been doing here. All of a sudden that child is being extorted for behaviors that they would never approach on their own.
Wow.
That's how they would set the hook. If a child at that point went to the parent and said, you know, so-and-so has been doing X, Y, and Z, the parents may not believe the child. And once that happens, the downhill spiral gets pretty deep, pretty fast, and it can last for years.
Wow. That sort of behavior is...
It is.
I mean, it's chilling, because, I mean, usually you hear about people who, they go to prison, it's mainly, they have impulse control. But this type of characters that you're talking about are long-term, predatory,
it is very predatory.
Calculating, sociopathic.
There's a plan. It's a long-term plan, and that's amongst the most...
chilling.
The most difficult. But it's also the one that the parents can learn to recognize. because they are the first ones that this person approaches. They look to see what kind of protective system is around that child.
Right.
You know, it might be a grandparent, it might be a teacher, you know, who else is around that child saying, you know, this isn't going to work.
So these people that were interviewed and they're saying this is how I would do it, these are people who don't feel any remorse, they don't feel any embarrassment for like, hey, I'm just, this is like...
That may be a completely separate issue from them.
Yeah,
so the entire purpose of that training exercise was to find out how they did it.
Yeah, it's irrelevant to what you're trying to achieve. I just kind of a little curious.
I don't know that any of them
it just
are going to get to a remorseful state.
These are people who are probably not, you'd never probably be able to rehabilitate.
Well, most of them were still in custody when the interviews were taking place, so you kind of hope that they're not going to be able to repeat what they're doing. But the number of victims that were being cited before they were caught were sometimes in the hundreds.
Oh my God.
It was often much greater for male victims than female victims. Little girls being preyed upon were believed much earlier than some of the boys. Some of the boys didn't want to say anything because they were embarrassed.
Yeah.
So they didn't. It went on longer, and
geez.
so it often took longer for somebody who was preying on boys. And each of these predators has their own favorite set of victims.
So
none of it's good.
When you
but
do
a lot of single moms, I think that's an area where single parents often are targets. And so if they can surround themselves with a good support system, sometimes it's just going to be a group of other moms in a similar situation that they can help each other. Keep an eye out. More than one set of eyes is going to be helpful. Some manage to form those relationships. Some, if they're estranged from their families or maybe not living close to other relatives, they don't have that kind of extra help.
Right.
So if somebody, you know, sees a single mom, they've got to realize that there are more dangers there than just whether, you know, how is she going to manage to handle all these expenses at once.
Right, right.
It's a tough deal. It takes...
Yeah. I was raised in a single family. My mother, she worked 2 full-time jobs, and we were latchkey kids. So one of the reasons why I have a passion for, you know, helping organizations that are involved with helping women with domestic violence or helping the kids, you know, who are at risk. So, and I've pondered over the years, what do we do as far as within our school systems? Like if you get the office, if you get in the office where you want and you work with people, are there programs, is there educational curriculum, something you could put in the curriculum that would instruct the kids on various things and also the parents, like, you know?
I think you have to start pretty much with the parents because that's who's being groomed first.
Yeah, well, I don't mean...
That's the first line of defense to me. And it's very difficult to get a curriculum into a school because a lot of parents are going to be a little bit squeamish about who's talking to their kids about these kind of things and when. But quite often, the victims are pre-K. They're not even in school yet.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the school is fine once you get to children 4, maybe 6 and above.
Yeah.
But a lot of the victims are younger children, and that's difficult. How do you explain to a kid what's inappropriate?
Right. Well, I went off mentally. I went off mentally on a tangent that kind of like. No, that's... Aside from this, there's other things that other things that have nothing to do with us, sexual predation or anything like that. Is parents and kids, like with the bullying that's going on in school nowadays with the kids. So are there, like, I always thought, well, it'd be great if you could have a mediation programs that's designed intellectually for kids at different ages or for parents, you know, something to say, hey, this is how we could resolve things, this is how we communicate, this is how we could basically address life to kind of take the stress and burden off. So many other things aside. It's
tough to do that. In some cases, I think it's working. Sometimes the child who is bullying has been or is being exposed to some of these other adverse behaviors. They may need some kind of support in order to not feel like they're going to have to take over that to get some control in their own life. Kids will act out in different ways. You watch them and each child may go along behaving a certain way and all of a sudden there's a change. Well, what's that change due to? Something else has gone on. You know, with older kids, sometimes they turn to drugs or do other things, but even with younger kids, you know, something at home is not quite the same, and the teacher notices something's different. Well, what's different? Maybe, you know, grandpa and grandma, somebody's really sick. They're worried about it.
Parents are fighting,
it
divorced.
Could be a number of things. And so that child, once they feel maybe they don't have the same support at home, they're going to start acting out, looking for some attention. They don't have the same coping skills that adults do. They just don't. Nobody teaches a child how to cope with things one at a time. A lot of schools have fewer counselors than they used to. I know during the early 2000s, there were a lot of schools that were seeing budgets that were being cut. You know. They needed to make sure they met the instructional days. Counselors not doing instructional things, so that was somebody who found themselves on the chopping block. And that's where, you know, I got introduced to the one counselor at the one school, because she was trying to make sure there was going to be a way to save some of those counseling resources.
Right, yeah.
Didn't happen in every case. Some of the cases just decided that they could do without a counselor, and they would take those tasks and give them to the teachers individually or to the principal. Those people already have a full plate of responsibilities. So I think long-term, getting some counselors back into the schools would be a very helpful thing. And I think each district is going to have a different set of challenges, depending on what they've been able to maintain through lean budget times. It's they're all at a different starting point. But again, the county statistics are there through DHS. They know how many cases they're seeing. If they see a number of cases that's increasing, well, they probably need to add some more research to get that under control. So the district attorneys, the law enforcement, they're all going to have information that could be coordinated with the schools to see where are we at, and we're making progress.
Well, you know, when you look at to me, the most insidious, dangerous types of child abuse, you know, I think of sexual abuse. I think of violence, children being beaten and purposely starved, or what other sort of things that people may not think of, where they may think, well, this is kind of how some parents are. That's not a big deal. What other forms does abuse take?
Neglect and hunger.
Neglect and hunger. Okay.
Those are two very simple things, and there are a lot of programs that are working in that direction.
Okay.
A lot of the schools will have a closet program. Somebody has some lightly used clothing.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so a child comes to school and maybe that whatever they're wearing isn't faring very well. Sometimes they'll be able to do a change, and the child can then wear something else home. Not every parent's going to welcome that, because they feel like they're being put under a spotlight. So you got to be very careful to do that. You don't want the kids to be highlighted as, well, you have to go in there because you come to school in dirty clothes.
Right.
You got to handle that, make sure that their dignity is intact.
Right.
There are a lot of weekend backpack programs for hunger. Backpack programs, they will have ready-to-eat type things that are age-appropriate. Can a kid, you know, can of Dinty Moore stew in a microwave, you know, put it in a bowl. Teach the kids some basic things. A lot of times, you know, fruit will be fine. So if there's a way to have a fruit bowl at, you know, Boys and Girls Club or something, it's like, have a snack. That used to happen quite often. You'd see somebody grab one. Okay, everybody grab one. And then the child would ask, can I take another one for my sister, you know, or my little brother? You know, the answer is always yes. Because if they're the one who is starting to try to find ways to feed the family, even when they're young, you find a way to make that answer yes every single time.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's going to be different ways to get, you know, supermarkets or, you know, other markets, farmers markets, whoever's got a spare source of food to chip in on those sorts of things.
Yeah, yeah.
One I'm very familiar with in Lebanon, there's actually a motorcycle group that raises money through various activities they do, and they donate and they sponsor so many kids per year within the backpack program.
What's the name of that motorcycle group?
That is the Road Maggots.
Okay.
You know, not everybody's got a really, you know, market-tested name that would Madison Avenue would approve of.
I kind of like it.
As long as, you know, the people who get involved in the background don't have to be polished professionals. They can be absolutely anyone in the community who feels that they've got a stake in making sure these kids do better.
Big brothers, big sisters.
Big brothers, big sisters. All these kind of things come into play. They meet a different need for each of the children.
Of course, a lot of funding has been cut out for a lot of these programs, like Big Brother. We used to have a Big Brother, Big Sister chapter here, and I went to inquire.
I'm not sure what the funding sources were for those particular programs. I know different boys and girls clubs, depending on who the volunteers are. Some of them are very good fundraisers on their own, and they find ways to fill the gaps.
I called the YMCA because I'd years ago been involved with Big Brothers, and then now that I have, since I'm retired more or less, I've been wanting to kind of reach out in the community and find my niche. And Big Brother, Big Sister chapter was no longer around, but went through the YMCA. And I had talked to the lady who was in charge of that, and I said, well, let me know what's up. And she goes, well, a lot of the funding, we may not have this program anymore, so you know.
Some things are available in grants. So, you know, what kind of grant funding is there from either state or federal programs? Sometimes it's a matter of making sure that you have the matching portion to get that grant as well.
Well, maybe the churches, may look around to some of the churches may have programs or things like that.
They
maybe,
do, but again, there are sometimes issues with religious organizations being able to access some of the grants. They may have the volunteers, but they may not have the materials, which is where the grant comes in.
Okay.
And so that has sometimes been an issue, you know, which church group is doing what, and some people have objections.
So what do you recommend that we do as a community, as individual private citizens, to help you and these other organizations? What would you say to the
whenever
audience?
they're approached or whenever they see one of these things, it's very easy to part with a $20 bill. I don't know too many people that won't, once in a while, reach into their wallet and just drop $20 where they think it's going to do some good.
So if I know people who have like lots and lots of canned goods and stuff, and they want to donate
I would head
it
for a food bank. I mean, what is it that they have? Where does it need to go? You know, does a domestic violence shelter need, you know, personal hygiene items for women that might come in that have no personal possessions? What do they need? Sometimes cell phone cards for prepaid cell phones. They need to have a new phone number. One group that I was involved in at one point in time, we took upholstery samples from a furniture store. They were changing out their fabrics. And we took those and turned those into tote bags and things like that, so that when somebody came into a shelter, they had something that didn't look like a garbage bag.
Wow, that's pretty.
It's a tote bag.
That's innovative. That's
it's different. You take free materials, you turn it into something useful, and then along with that, they said, okay, now we need to have a toothbrush and toothpaste and a brush and so on. So we had one group of people who went out to different stores and said, hey, look, I need 50 tubes of toothpaste. What can you do for me?
Yeah.
So we get, you know, one group of people were working on getting the items to fill the bags, and you had several other ladies who are very talented, and they would match up these various fabrics and do something that was pretty good. And a couple of people said, you know, we should really sell these. It's like, well, okay, maybe that's a viable option. I'm sure there were a few of them that people would have paid decent money and roll that money back into buying supplies to go into it. So there is no single source of ideas that's going to work in every community. Whatever talent somebody has, is there a way for them to put it together and find a way to either fund or get the materials to be used by either, you know, a government agency or, like you said, a church or some other group, Boys and Girls Club. There's always a need, and there's always somebody who's going to be able to fill that need. Last week, you had talked about working with kids who had you know, few issues, maybe with law enforcement. I was in the Lynn County Budget Committee and listening to what the juvenile department was doing as an educational program. And what they've done is they have a native plant nursery, and they have the youth raising these native plants. Then these plants are then sold to the Forest Service. They go to the road department. So after a construction project is complete, say next to a bridge, they're able to restore native vegetation. So it's kind of a long-term thing. They're teaching the kids to propagate, maybe do a little nursery work, but they're trying to work this up to be a little more of a business. And one of the things that they're always looking for new products, so to speak, that can be put into that whole collection of things, because things don't always grow at the same season and so on and so forth. Different skills required. And it occurred to me, I have a pasture that has some of the most beautiful native canvas, I think, anywhere in the valley. And so I've contacted, you know, the head of that agency, and I said, okay, well, not too many weeks from now, there will be seed pods that you can bring out a crew of your residents and collect them. And as we were talking about this after the meeting, one of the commissioners let me know that this is something he's been doing for years, and using the seeds from his pasture to then be a cover crop underneath his grapes.
Oh, okay.
So they already have partnerships with the master gardeners to help the juvenile department. It's like, I had no experience in propagating and increasing these things from what I had initially. I've been the steward of that property for 25 years, and I've kept it that way, intentionally. But now we have an opportunity to increase the amount of native plants that are available, teach these kids how to do it, and quite honestly, they'll be more informed on doing that than I am in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how many kids will be exposed to that particular piece of the program, but however many there are, they can carry that forward. So, you know, there's a piece of environmental benefit that's kind of come around as well.
Yeah.
But what they're doing also is teaching them about invasive species and other things. So maybe these kids are not quite ready to be in a vocational training program. They may have some catching up to do academically. But there are sometimes some agricultural jobs that could use people who are understanding what needs to be done with the plants. What's an invasive plant look like? What do you do to treat it properly, and so on. So it's not necessarily a full-fledged training program for vocational, but it's a beginning. Right. And so now that I've kind of recognized I had something sitting there outside my window, there was a resource for free. I don't think I'll be able to drive down the road and see too many things that I can't say, you know, I had to pull in that driveway and see if these people want to do. I don't want to run in there with a bucket and start taking things from them, but it'll be easier to come up with additional ideas. One of these, you know, one idea leads to the next.
Yeah. And so you have a lot of good ideas.
I want to connect those dots.
You have a lot of good ideas. You got a lot of ideas that I've never even heard of that sounds like pretty innovative, like a game changer type of idea. So we got like a minute left. What would you like to say? What's your website? And
my website is ChristineRuck.com.
Okay.
And it explains a little bit about, you know, what I've done, my background, my appointments, and it basically contains the information that's in the voters pamphlet right now. So the primary deadline for the election is May 15th, couple weeks away. People already have their ballots. Yeah. So they can start choosing me right now if they wish. I hope they do, but also there's a way that they can contact me. If anybody has a question about how I would go about solving a problem, I'm more than happy to discuss that.
Excellent. I hope win, lose, or draw in this race. You have this goal. Obviously, you're a winner, and you just you know you're going to win. But I mean, you know, that's how you got to look at it, right? You have to look at it that way. I have a list of basically possible bills. Okay. It's up to about a dozen now. A lot of different people I respect have given me challenges. I have 2 doctors on that list who have given me 2 different tasks. One of them, she started telling me about the ACEs program, and I said, yeah, I've already had training on that. She wasn't aware that I knew what ACEs was. Right. But she has connected that to the PTSD that she sees in some of her young patients. Yeah. And then the other one has to do with funding cancer research. And so in the next several weeks, hopefully, I'll have something else I can You got a list of things, each of which would love to spend an hour on each one and talk to you. So the thing is, win, lose, or draw. I hope that you're going to stay in the game and be involved, right?
Yeah, I've been involved.
You've been involved until now, and I hope you continue to be.
For many years, and so I continue to have that.
Because there's some people who just drop out. I'm not winning, and I just want to go to Mexico and be a scuba bum, and that's it. That's fine, but.
No, not my deal.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.